Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of the day it happens to be where you are. For those who don't know me, my name is Matt Doyle. I'm a UK-based author of sci-fi and horror and an occasional voice actor. I've appeared on Visited by Voices twice before now, so when Sam and Lorne offered me the chance to be part of the network, I was absolutely thrilled. So a big thank you to you guys. You're going to see me looking to sort of all around the place at the moment because I've got my notes for this episode on my screen and the camera is actually up a little bit higher than I'd like it, so I'm having to move around quite a bit. I will figure this out, how to get this better for future episodes, I'm sure, but in the meantime this is what you're left with. So I want to treat this show as a sort of pseudo cabinet of curios of sorts. I want to talk about horror media that I think is either a little bit overlooked or obscure, stuff that's a little bit strange, or in some cases stuff that I just love, even though people levy some sometimes quite justifiable criticisms at them. And it's actually that third part there that I want to start with today, because we're going to talk about the 1961 kaiju movie Gorgo, directed by Eugene Leray. Now, this film follows a sea captain, Joe Ryan, and his first mate, Sam Slade, as they discover and capture an amphibious sea creature off the coast of Ireland. Along with a young orphan named Sean, they take the creature back to London and place it on display in a circus. The creature's larger mother then comes to London, leaving a trail of destruction in her wake as she attempts to retrieve her child, and that is pretty much the story in a nutshell. The movie was originally going to be set in Tokyo as a tribute to Godzilla, and that would have been a nice piece of things coming full circle, because the nuclear-powered flame breath that was used by the creature in Laray's most famous monster movie, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, was part of the inspiration for the original Godzilla movie in 1954. Once that setting was ruled out, according to film historian Bill Warren's book Keep Watching the Skies, Southern Australia was then considered, and allegedly the producers ruled this out in part because there were no recognisable landmarks at the time, and in part because they felt like people wouldn't care if a monster attacked Australia. They apparently actually said this, nobody would care, which is a very, very strange comment to make. But it's interesting because I looked into this, and I couldn't find many giant monster movies actually set in Australia, and most that do exist take place in less populated areas, like 1984's Razorback and 2017's Boar, for example, both about giant pigs, both set in the outback. There's a messy but not entirely charmless, if you enjoy early 2010 CGI monster movies, called Tasmanian Devils, which no prizes for guessing what giant animal it's about, and that was set in a secluded part of Tasmania. The exception to the rule happens to be Godzilla, of all things, because in the 2004 Godzilla Final Wars, when Godzilla battles Zilla, which is the Japanese take on the American take from the 90s of Godzilla, that actually takes place in a more populated part of Australia. Similarly, in 2017, there was Godzilla Planet of Monsters, and there's a newsreel shown that we see Dagara attacking Australia. The closest we've gotten in the West is a brief mention of a Titan-sized bunyip appearing on a monitor, and that's in the 2019 film Godzilla King of Monsters. Why Australia manages to avoid having so many kaiju attacks is anyone's guess, really, but I choose to believe that, other than Godzilla, obviously, giant monsters tend to be about as scared of Australian wildlife as the rest of us. So once they ruled out Australia, they decided to set this as a joint effort between England and Ireland. Now, the islands that they use in Ireland are called the Nara Islands. Despite the sound of the word Nara, it is not actually a tribute to Japan either. That's actually an anagram of the Aran Islands, which are a real set of islands of the Irish west coast. Strangely enough, though, that is not actually where they filmed. So there we go. When it comes to special effects, in The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Leray used stop-motion legend Ray Harryhausen, but in this case, they decided to go with suitmation and miniaturization. Now, if you don't know the terms, you will know the style. This is the technique you see in the older Godzilla films, and for people of a certain age, you would have seen it in Power Rangers as well. This utilizes a mix of miniaturized locations for the person in the suit, which in this case is Mick Dillon, to stomp through and destroy. And they have this very recognizable, slow, purposeful look to it. And the way that works is you have the actor doing the slow, purposeful movements, but you also filmed in slow motion to double up on the effect. And that was very expensive at the time. Less so now, but it was really kind of a big deal when Gorgo was coming out. In terms of a legacy, Gorgo has turned up in some very odd places over the years too. Many people will probably know Gorgo from Mystery Science Theater 3K. They give it the random mockery you'd expect from the show. Footage from the movie also appeared in Disney's Flubber in the background on the TV screen. It was used as the background in, of all things, an episode of The Twisted Tales of Felix the Cat. And it was also the basis for the notoriously cheaply made music video Ichiban by Ash. Most strangely, though, Gorgo appeared in a campaign video by the US politician Angus King. And you can still see this on YouTube if you search for Godzilla and Angus King, because I'm assuming someone thought you didn't have to fact check your monsters, or the people would just see a giant lizard and think, ah, it's Godzilla. According to the very small number of comments on the video, that is not what happened, and people were quite happy to point out it was Gorgo. In more recent times, we've seen a re-release of the original comic book series that ran from 1961 to 1965 in hardback collected editions, I think by IDW Publishing. Those comics actually acted as an adaptation of the movie and as a sequel. There's a 2023 Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray release that restores the film to 4K, and that also comes with, as a bonus, a short sequel filmed in 2010 by Cinemagine called Waiting for Gorgo. That's a below 20-minute comedy piece about a Ministry of Defence auditor attempting to find out what the Department of Monsters and Oversized Animals, or DMOA, actually does. Now, if you like seeing the British Civil Service royally mocked, and as an ex-member of the British Civil Service, I absolutely love it, you will have some fun with that. So, why do I want to talk about Gorgo? The first reason, and this is one that I will acknowledge is a very dumb reason, is the film was a collaboration between Britain and Ireland. Now, I myself am a dual national, British and Irish, and I've actually held both passports before. So in that respect, it feels a bit like a natural fit. Second of all, and this is the bigger reason, even in its time, reviews were not entirely kind. The effects were quite rightly, in my opinion, praised. In particular, people tended to focus on the fact that the younger Gorgo was smaller than most giant monsters, so the sets around Gorgo were built to a larger scale than those around the mother, which added a nice little splash of realism. The monster suits were very nice as well, and the design itself was actually quite decent, even if it does beg, borrow and steal elements from elsewhere. But a lot of people tended to view it as a missed opportunity to talk about larger topics. Was that due to Godzilla being so effective with its message? And definitely more so in comparison. Perhaps. But I think it's an unfair criticism. Gorgo can be taken as a dumb monster movie. It's clearly better thought out than some of the more infamous Western releases, like, say, the Killer Shrews, which was also mocked by Mystery Science Theater 3K, and I did also admittedly have some fun with. And you can, but the point is, you can enjoy Gorgo without giving any attention to subtext or what the film might be trying to say. But that being said, I do think there's more there than there's generally thought to be. For one, the setting allows the movie to make some interesting comments about the state of British-Irish relations at the time. You know, when Sam and Joe first arrive on Nara, the locals understand English, but they mistrust the pair, so they refuse to speak in anything other than Gaelic. The harbour master, Kevin McCartin, is also very hostile towards them and lies about them needing a permit to stay longer and won't help them get their apparently unseaworthy boat up and running. Soon after Gorgo attacks the island, Sam and Joe then bully and essentially blackmail and rob Kevin, forcing him to hand over a priceless archaeological find as an advance payment for catching the monster, again in their unseaworthy boat. Later, when implored by the Irish government to give the creature over to the University of Dublin for research, they say they will, but then take it to London to sell to the circus instead. What I find interesting about all this is it predates what became known as the Troubles in Northern Ireland by some years, but is obviously after the Civil War in Ireland. But it shows a clear depiction of the strain that was there between Britain and Ireland at the time. Do the Irish locals initially act unfairly towards Joe and Sam? Perhaps. But, past actions combined with Joe and Sam's later actions maybe make you feel that they could have also been justified. So it's a nice little bit of, I suppose, nuance to a degree. I quite like that. The main motivation, though, that's used to advance the story, certainly early on, is the idea of greed. So Kevin actually tells Joe and Sam that the treasures that he's found are, they're worth nothing to anyone but, as he puts it, eggheads. And he's trying to keep the Viking treasures for his own gains, while Joe and Sam, on the other hand, simply want to make quick money by exploiting the captured monster. Both locales, both London and the Nara Islands, suffer a great deal of destruction as a result of this. So there is a clear message that greed leads to bad things. It's how we get to those endpoints with the protagonists that is most interesting, though, because it gives us a little twist in what you would see as the general formula for this type of story from the era. For starters, the female lead here is probably Ogra, which is Mama Gorgo. Now, she's not actually referred to with the name Ogra in the movie, but Mick Dillon is listed in the credits as playing Ogra and Gorgo. And Ogra is referenced very early on, so I'm taking Ogra to be the actual canon name for the mother. Regardless, bar some extras, there aren't actually any women in the cast at all other than Ogra. The exception might be Baby Gorgo. The original comic adaptation presented Gorgo as male, but there are hints to the contrary in the movie. For one, Dawkins Circus names the monster Gorgo after the Gorgons of Greek mythology, and they were all female. No father arrives to assist with the destruction of London either, and the movie, arrived in a time where masculine strength was front and centre, so you would almost expect there to be a male presence there in some respect of the monster, but there wasn't. So it could be argued the species may reproduce parthenogenetically in the same way as some lizards. This idea leads to an interesting twist, though, because Gorgo shares many similarities with various monster movies, most notably the 1933 King Kong. And therein, no matter how many do now, that film did not set out to make the ape sympathetic. By the end, we're supposed to view it as a big, dangerous animal that has to die so the damsel in distress can be saved. Everyone knows that image of Godzilla sort of clutching her and swatting away at planes. We never get acknowledgement that removing Kong from his native environment is wrong. In the same way, in Godzilla, we know the beast must die by the end of the movie. It's used as a way to remind us to think about the aftermath of violence and what this means in a larger context. We don't see the destruction itself as being justified, and we aren't told to sympathise with the giant lizard. So, in some respects, Baby Gorgo is the damsel in distress here. Ogra, bringing the wrath of her motherly rage, literally destroying large chunks of London as she does, is all to get her child, which is a noble cause, and as a result, we're taught to view the monsters kind of sympathetically here. We want to see the pair reunited, even as we watch the damage ramp up. I think part of this is achieved by clearly showing how little thought is given to Baby Gorgo by those around her. The people who pay to watch her in the enclosure, the enclosure is smaller than her natural environment out in the ocean would be, and it's a far cry in terms of how it looks and how it would feel to her. And all those people there are pointing at her, and they're laughing at her, they're mocking her. And on top of that, Gorgo's forced to stay where she is by way of an electric fence. There's a definite degree of cruelty there. To my knowledge as well, this is the first kaiju movie where the monsters outright won. And given that tone of message, it kind of feels right that they do. They're our punishment for our lack of care of others. In many respects, the monsters are the heroes. But where does that leave Joe and Sam? The lack of a human female lead means neither is given a love interest to look out for, which is an arc that was common. You'd often see the damsel in distress, you'd also see the women scientists, and so on. The interesting thing is, though, they do still play out some standard familial style scenes. When Sean sneaks above, sort of onto their boat to set Gorgo free, the pair stop him and then decide they're going to keep him, because that's how orphans worked in the 60s. You found one that you liked, you lured them onto your boat with a giant lizard, and then that was it. They were yours. Joking aside, though, when they take Sean to a bed, Sean is naturally upset, even as they're taking him back to England with him, and they do decide to look after him. In that scene in particular, Joe stands at the head of the bed in a very fatherly pose, which would have been common at the time. With no mother present, Sam sits on the other end of the bed and sits there in a more comforting way, in the way that you would normally see the mother character or the female lead do. The arc here, it's interesting because it draws on all three of this makeshift family members and how they react. And the bedside scene kind of foreshadows this, because Sean is the innocent child who's lost his parents, and he automatically sympathises with Gorgo. It might be that he acknowledges that Gorgo has been taken away from a parent, so he can kind of see a little of himself in the monster. He might just be kind-hearted. I mean, he's far more open and welcoming to Joe and Sam from the get-go, and he's actually the one to inform them that the harbour master is lying when they said that they need a permit. The main thing is, though, that innocent flies in the face of Joe and Sam's goals, because they're both just in it for the money. As things escalate, Sam, who of course had the motherly position on the bed, is the first of the two to start to sympathise with Gorgo. Sean appears to be spending more time with Sam than Joe too at this point, which it mirrors the change in Sam's attitude. Joe, on the other hand, stubbornly clings on to his beliefs until maybe the final third of the film. As the destruction hits its high point, they see that Sean is missing and they split up the search for him. It's actually Joe that finds him, and he puts the child's safety first. There's no indication he's come around to Sean's way of thinking entirely, or that he's reevaluated how he sees Gorgo's worth. But that placing of importance on the boy's life does show a change in him. He's now acted selflessly rather than focusing on his own success and well-being. Gorgo, I think, wants us to consider things from a view other than the traditional adult need to place self-preservation and our own comfort above that of others. Sean doesn't care about money, he just doesn't want to see the monster hurt or separated from its parents. His view is the typical one we'd see from a child who lacks the consideration that other adults might have for other things, such as having to make a living. But the core message is still compatible with adult life, hence both Sam and eventually Joe becoming more caring by the end of the film. We can all care about others, even monsters. That's a good message. This all being said, I am not going to sit here and tell you that Gorgo is a perfect film. It is not a perfect film by any means. It's not a masterpiece that's going to change your life. It is a very flawed movie. While there are the character arcs I've spoken about, the film's still relatively thin in terms of their overall characterization. The acting is fine. They do a great job with the script that they're given, but it's not unusually good because the script doesn't write it unusually good. There's a lot of things as well that, you know, you might expect to see in films from this era. Inexplicable events, like when they catch Gorgo. I cannot fathom how Gorgo ended up quite as tangled in the net as Gorgo did, just based on how the net went in. Similarly, while it's a good effect that they have with trying to show the difference in size between Gorgo and Ogre, and it works great until Gorgo and Ogre are next to each other and the film can't quite decide on the scale. The scale looks very different when they're next to each other than it does when you just compare them with the models, and the size kind of seems to fluctuate a bit, almost to the point of for anime fans, the Fist of the North Star OVA, where people would shrink and grow from shot to shot. It is very much like that. So no, Gorgo isn't a masterpiece, but I do think I have a suitable analogy for it. In 2004, Dave Grohl of Nirvana and the Foo Fighters fame released an album called Probot. He wrote and recorded a series of songs while working with various metal vocalists that he admired. Now, the album was a decent listen, but it was never going to be in the conversation for greatest album of all time. To be honest, I would be surprised if it was in conversation for greatest album of that year. But I don't think that was the point of the album. It was more something that allowed Dave Grohl to have fun paying homage to his heroes that came before him. And from King Diamond and Motorhead to early Corrosion of Conformity and Sepultura, it had such a wide catchment area of influences. The album was made with a lot of love for that. But you don't necessarily need to share that love of the originals to enjoy it. To me, Gorgo is the Probot of kaiju movies. It can be viewed as a fairly routine post-Godzilla monster movie, and that is entirely valid. But it was also made by an experienced and respected director who was playing with elements of some of the best-known giant creatures of the time, and did so with a lot of love. Neither Probot nor Gorgo reached the quality of the best of the other releases that they were paying homage to, but they put their own spin on well-worn themes and created something that is worthy of your time. So if you've never seen Gorgo before, give it a look in. If you don't want to pay out for the 4K re-release, that's fine. It's been uploaded to YouTube countless times. You can find it so easily. If you have seen Gorgo and you really weren't impressed, maybe give it another look and think about some of the things that I've raised today, see if it increases your enjoyment of it. And if it doesn't, that's absolutely fine too. We all have our own tastes. But that, I think, is that. So let me know in the comments below what you think of Gorgo and what you thought of the video in general. I'm going to try and make things gradually better as I go along, because this is all still very new for me too. And, you know, maybe let me know some of your own little curios from your cabinets, your horror films and books and so on that maybe are a little bit unusual. I'm always happy to look into some new little oddities. So, until next time. Later.